Well, good morning.
Good morning.
We are in section 14. Who's in charge here? God and Christ in reconciliation, in Guthrie's book, The Doctrine of the Resurrection. And I'm trying to figure out where we were. All right, we're in Roman numeral 3.
The Lord and His kingdom?
Yeah, the Lord and His kingdom, and I think we are down by ruling in the tension of absolute power and freeing humanizing love. So what I'll do is I'll just go through these bullets and just kind of refresh. Because last week I don't even think we got to the to the outline. We were talking about other things. All right, so when we talk about the Lord and His kingdom, right, because this is important, because so much of what Jesus talks about is not heaven, but it is what?
The kingdom.
The kingdom, right? Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven. So, and this is why we know so little about heaven, but we know probably more about the kingdom, as Jesus spoke about the kingdom all the time, right? So, and it's not an accident that political images are used for the resurrection, because the Jewish people are inundated with politics, whether it be their own politics or politics about what?
Land.
Land, right, being tied to the land. What else? Who do they have to worry about more than probably their own rulers?
The Romans.
The Romans. Yeah, so I mean, not only do they have to pay attention to their politics, but they have to read page 2 of the newspaper and go into the international section and see what's going on in Rome as well. So that's also important as well. The meaning of the resurrection is undemocratic. We talked about that 2 weeks ago. Remember, democracy at this point in the world is still a thought child of Plato. It's an idea, right? They haven't really gave it a whirl yet. Plato talks about, it's a real short little piece, I think it's, what is it, form of government? It's something with government in a title, but he talks about, it's a cycle, his idea, and you start out with a kingdom, right, or an autocracy, and then the people, if it's a bad king, the people overthrow the king, right? And now you have a democracy. The people rule. Everything is wonderfully made, right? The problem is now a group of people rise to the top. And now you have an oligarchy, right? Now you're ruled by a few rather than by the people. And then, as Plato talks, that oligarchy will eventually, one powerful person will rise to the top, and then you'll have all over again a monarchy. And according to Plato, this cycle just kind of, like ball of confusion, round and around and around it goes. It just keeps. That's what a circle does, right? But this is why we have so many issues that we don't even realize with the Bible. Because as people who we feel we are democratic, we feel that we should have a say, and yet the Bible is not that way. It's a book where you deal with kings and queens, and that's it, right? You deal with people who do have absolute power. And so when you deal with the New Testament, this is what Jesus talks about. Jesus talks about a kingdom. It's not like in the kingdom everyone will have one vote, equal vote, and it doesn't work like that. And so we, all of us, because this is our worldview, right? So when we come at this, it's confusing even if we don't realize it, because it is a total foreign thing to people in this side of the world. Because we've never lived like that in the United States. And so we have issues with this. We have issues even with the concepts of Jesus talking about, selling all your possessions, giving it to the poor. It's these concepts that we we don't think about these things. We say, well, that sounds fantastic, but how many of us, like the young rich man, would walk away despondent? Even if we weren't super wealthy, to say to give away all your possessions, even the ones that you've cherished and prized all your life, would be very, very hard.
And debated by irresponsible.
And in many ways, we would be, many of us would then be homeless.
Right.
So, yes.
Somebody else takes care of us.
And then
Right,
someone else
right.
had to, but that was the point of the ancient church.
Yeah.
And the ancient church was everything was being pulled together. And they were being taken care of. And when they weren't being taken care of, that's when the diaconate was made, right? Then that's when deacons were born, because widows were being abused, or they weren't receiving their fair share of food. And that's when the apostles said, hey, we can't serve tables. It's just a weird piece in Acts. It's actually kind of humorous. It's like they were basically being stretched too thin. But this whole idea about democracy is non-existent, right? It's undemocratic, right? And that's when we understand that, we will understand the worldview in which this is written in a clearer way, because that's how you have to understand it. This is how it is written. So I remember during seminary, one of our theology professors was from Germany, and she was great. So you always had two professors. You had a lead professor, and then you had an assistant professor. And as it was taught, you were able to get the tension between the two. It wasn't a negative thing, but you can see the differing opinions of the professors, because no one ever agrees 100% on everything.
How good the classes?
How big? I want to say the theology class was probably about maybe 35, 40 students, because it was a required class.
Yeah.
So, about 40 students. So in your electives were probably more like 15, 20. But like a core was probably 35, 40 at Columbia. And we were talking about predestination. And of course, not everyone in the classroom is Presbyterian. It is a PCUSA seminary, but you have students from other denominations, you have students from non-denominations, and so you have, and even within our denomination, not everyone is totally sold on predestination either. And so you have this big hodgepodge. And so when we talk about predestination, it was a wonderful section, because there's lots of good arguments, about, well, what is it? How does that work? No, I don't think that works like that. And I remember the professor from Germany, she said, we don't have an issue with that, with predestination in Germany, us Reformed theologians. It is what it is. This is how Calvin saw it. We agree what Calvin said. Done deal. She said, here in the States, you have a problem with it because you're fiercely independent. You're raised to be fiercely independent. You are raised to fight for your individual rights. And she said, and here's what it is. That's your worldview. And so when someone tells you you don't have a choice in the matter, it doesn't bode well. And although, that caused its own grumblings, and it did, as I sat there and after I grumbled and then thought about it, it really made sense what she was saying, right? So when we think about that, I try to, again, remember the importance of context, right? And you have to force yourself to sit within their perspective, because that's how it's written. It's not written in our perspective. It's not even written in our time, period, right? So to truly understand it for what it is, you have to do that, right? And you have to try to take off your 21st century.
And usually you can never do that.
You
can
100%. You can't do it. You can't, and that causes the friction, right? That's the tension. That's what makes it difficult. But it is what it is. It is what it is.
For us, I see when you're saying that about your professors, we have family. I am Latin American, he's Arab, we live here, and going to church in every single one of these cultures the sermons that you hear are completely different. You know,
Yeah,
in Latin America, still liberation theology is a
Yeah.
huge thing.
yeah.
You know, there is.
Gutierrez,
Yeah.
powerful.
It is still a thing, you know. And even when you talk, you know, with my mom, the way my mom lives her faith, it's so interesting.
It is very,
And then
yeah,
you go to the Middle East, and I think they probably understand it better. I mean, the context for them is actually more real
yeah.
than for any one of us.
It's probably closer
Yeah.
to how it was written. I mean, Jordan still has
Well,
kings, right?
yeah.
I mean, so this whole idea,
And the family,
yeah,
so, you know, the way.
yeah,
so
it is closer.
very much.
Yeah, most
Yeah.
definitely.
I'm reading As I Lay Dying right now, which is,
As you lay, no.
Mississippi author.
That's fine.
What?
As you lay dying, no. Don't.
No.
Yeah.
Scare me.
Who is that?
William Faulkner.
Okay, yeah.
And I mean, these people are very religious, very like more blood theology.
Like holiness almost?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely very Baptist. So it's just interesting because I don't know if you know this, but each chapter has a different narrator. It's all first person, although, I mean, they repeat, but it'll be like chapter 1, Darrell, chapter 2, Addie.
So it's the
chapter
same
3.
situation over again, but each person looks at it differently?
No, it goes through time, but there is some overlap, but every chapter is a different perspective, and, but yeah, but there's a lot of talk about their relationship with God in their life, kind of thing, and just the way they look at it, is like, I don't see it that way, but I see how you could see it that way, kind of thing, you know what I mean? But yeah, very interesting. Anyway, that reminded me of that, so,
Yeah, yeah.
it's an interesting book. Takes a while to get into, but it's not long, so.
Some of the short books, you're like, I could breeze through this, you know, like Heart of Darkness, and no, you can't breeze through.
Right, well, that's why I wanted to read some Faulkner, and I looked at, let's see, Absalom, that's 300-something pages.
Right.
The Fire and the Fury, the Sound and the Fury,
Right,
that's
right.
400 pages. Let's
Right.
go for the one that's under 200. Yeah, all right, let's do that.
Yeah, and like theology is like that too. And so like what you were talking about and how you talk about different worldviews, it's like during Easter and Holy Week, in places where people have been oppressed for so long, many people will focus on the passion of Jesus because it gives them hope. It gives them, you know, if I suffer, Jesus suffered. Jesus suffered for me, so I could get through this. And then in places where life is more comfortable, focus is on the resurrection. And so, again, which one is right, which one is wrong? Neither. This is the story of Christ gives hope to people in different ways. Right? Neither one is right or wrong. It's where do you find hope within the story? If you find hope in the story that Jesus suffered for us, because I'm suffering, I look and I see Jesus suffering, and I need to push through this. I could do this. Then that gives you hope. If you say, you know, the resurrection gives me hope, then the resurrection gives you hope. You know, it's where do you find hope within the gospel story? You know, and it's in this crazy world, if you could find hope anywhere in the Gospels, you know, I say,
Go for it.
go for it, exactly, 100%, go for it. You grab onto that hope and you hold on with two hands. And you hold on with two hands, most
Because
definitely.
I think that's our duty, though. You know, I mean, really, find it and hold on to it.
That's it.
Do not just disregard the whole
right.
story.
Do not
Find
let it
where
go.
hope is for you and hold on to it.
That's right. That's right. Where you can find hope within the gospel, grab it and hold on with two hands. And yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. And so, you know, and this is, you know, you talk about liberation theology, you talk, you know, and there are so many versions of liberation theology, you know, and you look at certain individuals within the theological spectrum, you know, within Latin America, you know, Romero. I mean, powerful man. And he literally laid down his life for his beliefs. So, yeah, most definitely. So when we understand the meaning of the resurrection is undemocratic, it really helps. And it's not just the resurrection that's undemocratic. It's many things within the life of Jesus that's undemocratic, right? And the reason why there is language like kingdom talk, right? That's foreign to many of us. Christ has absolute authority. How is it used, right? And this is where we think Jesus is Lord, right? But what does that mean for someone like Jesus? And this moves us into the last piece, ruling in the tension of absolute power and freeing, humanizing love. And this is Jesus. Jesus is God, right? And yet, there are aspects about Jesus that not only because Jesus says, hey, look, I'm giving you access, right? But it's deeper than just that. It's Jesus saying, I call you brother. It's Jesus saying, I call you friend. It's Jesus washing the feet of his friends and disciples and saying, now you do this for each other. Because I'm here to serve and you're here to serve as well. So it's this creator of the universe and sustainer of all of this wonder, and yet on a level as a friend, on a level as a brother. And that blows my mind. And the more you study it, it should blow your minds too. Because it's ruling in this tension, and you understand that concept, right? Ruling in tension, so like you're kind of like in the middle of these, these almost polar opposites. You have a king with all of this power, and yet it's freeing and it's humanizing, and it's getting dirty and it's doing things that servants do. And so Jesus is kind of like in the middle. Jesus is God, and yet Jesus is saying, I'm here to serve, and I want you to do the same. This is how the kingdom will spread, and it's beautiful because it's very different. It's very different, right? So Jesus rules in this tension, right, between being Lord and freeing and, and love. And it's very, very different. All right, so let's move forward to A, the kingdom as an ideal to be realized. We're on page 277 of Guthrie's book, and this is not that big of a section. All right. One way of dealing with the contradiction between Christian claims about the lordship of the risen Christ and the kind of world we actually live in is to say Jesus brought not the reality, but the ideal of God's kingdom of justice, love, freedom, and true humanity. To be a Christian is to get to work and make the ideal a reality. By our commitment to Christ and by our Christian obedience, we may hope gradually to overcome the forces of evil in the world and bring in the kingdom of God. This hope may take either a liberal or a conservative form. If the church and individual Christians will just commit themselves to the battle against racism, sexism, homelessness, poverty, and militarism, ecological irresponsibility, and other social evils, then we may hope for the coming of God's kingdom on earth. Or we may hope for the coming of the kingdom if individual Christians and the church join in the battle against such evils as pornography, the erosion of traditional family values, the moral relativism, and permissiveness rampant at every level of modern society. However different their strategies, such liberal or conservative positions have in common the belief that the kingdom of God is a yet unrealized goal toward which we must strive. All right, so Guthrie is saying that the kingdom is not realized, right? At this point, it's an ideal. But it's an ideal that we can realize, right? So it's something that we work towards, right? It's not that Jesus said, okay, take 5 until I get back. Just relax. I'll be back a little bit later. Just hang out, Smoke them if you got them. It's not what he says. You know, Jesus says, I'm going now. Get to work. When I come back, don't let me catch you back. Don't let me catch you not doing anything, right? When I come back, you should be like, oh, hey, you're back. I was in the middle of doing this, you know, kind of thing. So we're encouraged to work because the way Reformed theologians understand Christ's kingdom is that the church is part of it, right? We are part of this kingdom, right, that is moving into our world, right? So even though Christ's kingdom is not fully realized, it doesn't mean that we cannot create and visualize and see aspects of kingdom life. Because we know how to do it. Why do we know how to do it?
He taught us.
Yeah. Jesus taught for 3 years. Yeah. Jesus taught. So we know. Jesus, we have everything from the Beatitudes. We have the Sermon on the Mount. We have all of these other mini sermons and parables and examples of how to live, right? If Jesus' only thing is to be crucified for eternal life, then why do you talk? He should have been born, grew up, and went straight to Jerusalem, caused havoc, and let them kill him. But that's not what he did, right? And he kept saying, it's not yet time. It's not yet time. It's not yet time. Got more teaching to do. got more stuff to talk about, right? And so the church has the ability to bring part of the kingdom into this world. We know how to do it. We know how to do it. And so it's to make the ideal a reality, right? We can bring part of this kingdom here. We know how to do it, right? And so Guthrie says whether you do it on the liberal side or a conservative side, because there are issues on either side, you know, Guthrie basically just says we should just get to work. Just get to work. You know, if you want to work on social justice, fantastic. If you want to work on, you know, bringing an end to pornography, great, get to work. You know, there's things to do. There are ways that we can attack this problem. There's ways that we, on both sides, can help promote Jesus' kingdom, right? And this is what Guthrie is talking about, right? So it is an ideal to be realized. But so many people look at it and say, well, that's the future. That's not now, that's the future. Jesus brings that. And it's to understand that we, as the church, are part of this kingdom. We don't have to wait. We can start bringing and start living as if we are in the kingdom now, right? We know how to live as Christ-like. You know, it's not a secret, you know? And that is my biggest, I guess, criticism of the Gnostics is that, you know, it was this, everything is a secret. Everything is this code that they understand. I'm like, you know, Jesus' teachings are not that complex. They're not. They're pretty simple because Jesus wants people to live it. Why would you make it? Yeah, why would you make it a secret if this is what you want people to do? You have to work to figure it out, but it doesn't mean that you can't figure it out. And so the kingdom is an ideal to be realized. Christ as Lord of all the aspects of our lives, or should be all of the aspects of our lives. I was reading a meme this week somewhere on social media, and I'm assuming it's Facebook because that's the only one I look at. Because, you know, I'm old. And that's, the kids don't even look at Facebook anymore. Right. Mom and Dad are on Facebook, so I'm going to find a new way to go at it. So when we think about it, Christ should be Lord of our life in all aspects, not just on that 1 hour at church on Sunday morning. And within the meme, it was talking about so many people feel that, you know, you go to church and it's like, you know, getting a shot on Sunday morning and out you go for the rest of the week. And then you are who you are outside of the church. And so as if we really take it seriously, that Christ is Lord of our lives, it needs to be of all of our aspects. So not just I go to church on Sunday morning, I go to study on Tuesday night. That's great. Not complaining. But it needs to be in the workplace. It needs to be how you handle yourself with your coworkers. It needs to be how you handle yourself out in public, in the streets, or in your house with your family. It needs to be how you deal with your neighbors. And so you say, yeah, I could do that, easy peasy. But then it's like, well, what do you do when your neighbors are causing trouble and you don't like your neighbors? That's where it begins to get difficult, right? And so just like all of Jesus' teaching, there's the ones you can say, oh yeah, I can totally do that, check. Then he just says, and love and pray for your enemies, and you're like, how do I check that box? Right?
It's like the rich young man. I mean,
Yes.
I follow. Look at this. All of them.
Yes.
I've got them, and Jesus says,
Yeah.
one more thing for you.
Yes.
Right.
And it's
Okay,
interesting.
goodbye.
Yes. And it's interesting because Jesus doesn't argue with him on that stuff. He's like, I follow the commandments, and Jesus is like, all right,
Right.
yeah, good. He doesn't say, well, yeah. No, he says, great. He's like, but you got one more thing you have to do. And that's when he's, I don't know about this. I might go check out Hinduism down the block. It's like, and he walks away despondent. And, and that is an important word to understand that, he's walking with his head down. Because this is something that Jesus asked of him that he just could not do.
But I read somewhere, if I have to or not, but we never know the rest of that story.
We don't.
I mean,
That's it.
I mean, that guy could
Yeah, I
have
was reading a
potentially
commentary.
Yes.
that
given
maybe
all
he
his
came
money
back.
and he came back. We have no idea. So
We have no
it's
idea.
not like he's gone. He's been thrown in the.
Yeah,
we don't know what happened.
He's had the rug pulled out from under him.
But he might have come back. Who knows?
Yeah,
It's not-
we don't.
yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. And this is, is this where Jesus says it's easier for a camel to move through the eye of a needle
Yeah.
than for a wealthy person to enter the kingdom of heaven? And so, and at that, even the disciples were perplexed. They're like, what the heck does that mean? It's just, it's just like, because Jesus had wealthy followers. It wasn't that he didn't. And so, but there are the tough things that when we have to give Christ reign over them, and every one of us has these things. It's not just like, oh, it's only going to be these. No, it's everyone. We all have the things that we hold dear to us. And when you think about it, it's like, it could be how you deal with situations. It's, how angry do you get when you drive your car? It's, it's things that, that impact us. Some of it is DNA, some of it's how we're raised, some of it's where we were raised. And it's how do you deal with these things? How do you allow Jesus to become Lord of every aspect of your life, right? And that is tough. That is tough, but that's what Jesus requires. And this is what the term sanctification is all about, right? It's this lifelong journey, walking with Christ, and allowing us, as we move through life, to become more Christ-like in our actions, right? It is not easy. It's not something you get overnight. It's not, there is no magical shot that you can get and just say, oh, this is it, and everything goes. Because even when you see individuals where that does happen, some things manifest in other places within their lives, because everything gets suppressed, right? And like a pressure cooker many times, then it eventually pops. So, but it's this way to figure out how to do this and how to manage this. But that's what Christ demands, right? And so it's trying to figure ways, how do we become more Christ-like in all aspects? So Christ must be Lord over all the aspects of our lives. Is it Christ, or have we tried to control this kingdom? The best way I could illustrate this point is, in many ways, we are made in the Imago Dei, yeah? We are made in the image of God. But in many times, sometimes we flip that. And we like to think of Christ in our image. What do I mean by that? What do I mean by we like to think of Christ? And this is not something that we do blatantly. It's more kind of like Subversively, it just kind of happens.
It's a part of a culturalization.
Yeah, yeah, I think part of it is a culturalization. Yeah, because
Well-
it's different in each culture. Yeah,
I like to do this, so God must like it.
yeah, makes me happy. It's a term I'm thinking of, like project.
Right.
Like we project on Jesus, thinking like, well, Jesus was a human, I'm a human, I go through this stuff, and so we kind of make Jesus in our image. We want to mold him
Well,
into
a
what we
political
want.
oppressor. I mean, politics, governments use that image.
All the time, all the time, and they've been doing it forever. God, just rewind back to when kings and queens used to use divine right. I'm here on this throne because Jesus put me here. Well, who can argue with that? Theologically, you can definitely argue with that, but you won't live that long. Right? I'm sure those kings and queens handpicked people, bishops and cardinals that supported them, and everyone else kind of, well, they're out of jobs and maybe out of a life. So, yeah, we've been doing that a long time, humanity. And that's, to me, the biggest problem with Christianity when it comes out of the catacombs is that Christianity in many ways is not meant to be held in the hands of the powerful. It's meant to just be the faith of people. But instead it gets kind of merged in now with governments, right? And so it gets plugged in, like you think of like like plugging in a machine into a socket, and now all of a sudden it does something it's not meant to do. And so here is this, Messiah, here's Jesus who talks about, freedom of oppression, talks about, lifting up the least of these.
My
and now,
kingdom is not here.
yeah, my kingdom is not here, but now my kingdom is trying to be merged in with this kingdom in France or England, or some other, kingdom. And it just doesn't work. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. And Rome. Right? Can't forget Rome. So it's getting plugged in ways where, and that's where it starts, right? It melds in with the Roman government. And no, it wasn't meant to do that, right? And so, one of my favorite bumper stickers about this subject matter is, I saw it on a person's car one time, and it said, the last time we merged religion and state together, we burned witches at stakes. We burned women at stakes, and that's the truth. You can't erase that from our own, and that's not like million-year-old history. That's, as the world goes, that's pretty recent. And so, yeah, it's not meant to do that. So sometimes we do try to control the kingdom, right? Sometimes we try to take the reins and make it go in our direction. And that could be in many different forms. People who would love the idea of ushering in this kingdom. You hear many times people talk about, well, Jesus needs to come back because people need to be punished for not believing. And I'm like, I really don't think that's the reason why Jesus is coming back. It's not the primary reason. It's like, what are your motives here? It's just like, Jesus is not just this big stick to beat up your enemies. It's just like, and so, and it happens in many different forms. And I think at times we're all guilty of this on some small scale, we like to think that Jesus is for us and against you see it when it comes to war, you see it in sports, it's all over the place. It's all over the place. And sometimes it's benign and sometimes it's not benign. Sometimes it's, okay, it's outright bad. But this is an example of something that shouldn't be going on, right? We don't control the kingdom. We have the ability to help usher it in. We have the ability to make part of the ideal a reality, but it is not our kingdom. This is not something that we control. It's not something we can control. And I think once we understand that, things get a little bit
We lose
easier.
power.
We lose power. And that's,
Is that thing is churches and groups of people always trying to figure out, spending lots of time and energy and money, who's in and who's out. I think that today is a huge thing.
being gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Who's in and who, and the day, you know, they lose that privilege,
Yeah.
they feel like they've lost everything.
that's right. Well, the church is treated like a country club. You know, you're in, you're out. In reality, there's only one being that makes that decision, and that's God. That's Christ. I mean, this is a church, you just welcome people. You let God worry about that. That's not our worry. Our job is to love and to, you know, help bring the kingdom by living the kingdom. Yeah, most definitely. And you see that in all aspects. You see it even within the church polity. When women and men are going into seminary, and some individuals get a little zealous, and they want to play gatekeeper, and they get a little overzealous, and sometimes you say, "Ooh, that person's different than you, and that's okay." And that's okay. So yeah, most definitely. All right. And the last piece, how are we trying to usher in this kingdom? Let's see how big this reading is. Yeah, I could read this. The idealistic answer is not the biblical solution to the problem. It subtly changes the kingdom of God into the kingdom of Christians or the church, and makes them the real ruler instead of Christ. That's what we were talking about, right? If Christ can be Lord only insofar as we let him be or make him Lord, who really is in control, right? If the kingdom can become a reality only insofar as we bring it or make it spread, whose kingdom is it really? Suppose we did collect enough money to build churches everywhere and expand the church's program beyond our wildest dreams. Would a successful rule of the church be the same as the kingdom of God? Suppose Christians, especially those who think like I think and want the same things I want, the I's are very important there, did get in control of everything. Would our rule be the same as the rule of God? What about the sinful self-interest and hostility towards others who think differently from us within the church and in us Christians? Whether our position is left, right, or middle of the road, could it be that there is so much burnout and despair amongst ministers and church members today precisely because we have taken on ourselves the terrible burden, along with the terrible arrogance of assuming that the kingdom of God cannot come unless we make it happen? So, that's something that we'll begin our next lesson with. And think about that this week, is how are we trying to usher in this kingdom? And how can we do it in a positive way, where we're not taking control, where it's not all about the I? And even if it was, as Guthrie said, even if we were able to do this, I, right? We set up churches that we like, that we agree with, then what do you do with all of a sudden now that there are some we's in there? And we don't agree with this. We think we should go this direction. And what do you do with all of Christians who don't think like that? Because that's always going to be here. Are they in the right? Are they in the wrong? Are they not for the kingdom? So yeah. All right. We'll pick up next week with this discussion.